PhD research on hydrogen, and as I said, did a lot of public engagement around it as well. And through doing those two things, it really revealed the kind of holes in the whole hydrogen plan, because public perception is a real sticking point for hydrogen. You know, most of the members of the public that I would talk to would have images in their mind either of hydrogen bombs, which are actually based on tritium, not hydrogen, but anyway.
I'm not sure that would help.
Well, yeah, exactly. So either hydrogen bombs or the Hindenburg disaster,
right.
which was, a hydrogen-filled airship, which like catastrophically exploded.
Whenever I see a photo of that, I always think what, you see it and you're like, they actually built this. Like, people actually thought this was a good idea.
I know. Yeah, it kind of baffles the mind, really. But so even now, even with the kind of good PR that hydrogen has been trying to put out over the last few years, public perception about it is pretty negative still. And if you were to go about trying to sell somebody a hydrogen car, that's a huge barrier to have to overcome before, they've even asked you about the performance of it. So that's the first side, is public perception. The second side is the different uses of it. And if we talk about hydrogen-powered cars, I am very skeptical as to whether they will ever be sort of rolled out at the same scale as like petroleum-powered cars, and also with electric cars, because a hydrogen refueling station costs around $1 million to install. And there are very few of them in the UK. In fact, there's an interesting map online which shows all of the hydrogen refueling stations around the world. Germany's got quite a few. Japan's pretty good. But essentially, if you had a hydrogen-powered car in London and you wanted to get around, you'd be fine. Sorry, did I say in the UK?
You said in London, yeah.
Okay, yeah. So if you had a hydrogen-powered car in the UK, you would be fine driving around London. You'd be fine driving to South Wales,
right? Because
there's a refueling station in Swindon. But
it's about all there is in Swindon.
Yeah. Apart from that, you'd be pretty limited as to where you could go. And so if you compare that to like battery technology, we have an electricity grid already.
Right.
That isn't a barrier. And so to me, it just seems that the barrier to entry for hydrogen-powered cars in a widespread way is just far too high compared to other competing technologies. That being said, there are other applications for hydrogen that are very competitive with other green technologies. A good example is buses and forklift trucks.
Right.
Or any kind of portable vehicle or portable object that always returns to the same depot at the end of the day.
Yep.
So you need one refueling station for many miles covered.
That's really interesting, yeah.
And yeah, so there are applications like that hydrogen can contribute to, and there are hydrogen buses driving around London now, and have been for years, perfectly happily and safely, and like in a green way. But with the specific example of cars, yeah, I just don't really see it happening.
It also doesn't really make sense to go from, because you produce a hydrogen by roughly electrolysis, isn't it? You put in electricity and then you turn water into hydrogen. That's probably an oversimplification, but
no, that's pretty accurate.
But that's a step. Yeah. You have to go from electricity, and instead of putting that straight into a car, you then have to go electricity to hydrogen to car.
Absolutely. Yeah. So there's a lot of losses during that process, but so hydrogen is a brilliant like storage of energy. And it's particularly good for portable applications. So we've been talking about vehicles and stuff because, hydrogen is the most lightweight element that we have. And so it's also incredibly energy dense. So that's what makes it so kind of enticing to engineers and researchers who are looking for this holy grail of like a lightweight
energy
and
density.
Compact energy source. Yeah, exactly. But you mentioned electrolysis there. I think only about 3% of hydrogen is produced in that way by splitting water. Like over 95% is as a byproduct of, what's it called? Yeah, like a byproduct of like splitting fossil fuels. So,
right, cracking.
again, hydrogen, it's not as perfect as it might seem on the surface, although it has this really enticing energy density.
That's really interesting. Yeah, I know. I did a presentation quite recently. I'm gonna plug myself for a sec. So I did a presentation quite recently, and in it there was a slide where I was talking about the advent of the electric car and when the electric cars are gonna come online. And there was a slide where I compared the energy density of petrol versus like a lithium-ion battery. And a lithium-ion battery is about 0.9 watt hours per kilogram. And then the equivalent in petrol is 44. And so the difference is huge. And so hydrogen's going to be way higher than that. And it takes energy to move something that's heavy, right? F equals ma. And so the bigger the m, the worse it is. So I mean, hydrogen just seems from that perspective to be, I guess, the way to go. But you don't just have hydrogen, right? I think that's perhaps the...
Yeah, exactly. With hydrogen, you have to consider that it's a gas. And so, yes, you can get really far with a kilogram of hydrogen, but that kilogram of hydrogen is going to be like, it'd take up about 4 meters cubed of a balloon, like towed behind your car to be able to get however far you want to go. So with hydrogen, it's the volumetric energy density that's incredibly low and so incredibly unfavorable. So the hydrogen cars that are on the market store hydrogen as a compressed gas. So they try and squeeze it into gas cylinders as much as they can, which is okay. It's pretty safe technology. Recording again.
Sorry about that. We had a small technical. We were talking about hydrogen. And so your research, the other thing about hydrogen, I think this is what your research worked on, is that you can store it inside a material, which obviously reduces your. And I guess I'll let you talk about what's the motive for doing that.
Yeah, exactly. So if you can store hydrogen inside solid materials, then the hydrogen density of that material is a lot higher than it would be if it was in like a gas atmospheric pressure, but also as a gas in a gas cylinder as well.
Oh, it's higher. I thought it was lower. Well, I'd assumed from an outsider that would be lower, but you'd then get better safety. But it's actually higher inside.
No. Yeah. So it's much more dense, like volume-wise, than it is even in a compressed gas cylinder. And also the cylinders themselves, if you're compressing gas to 700, 800 bar, they have to be really strong and quite thick and, quite like serious gas cylinders to be able to contain that safely. Whereas with a hydrogen storage material, you can hold it in your hand, you can put it in a plastic box, like it's not going to go anywhere, nothing bad's going to happen to it. It just sits there at, atmospheric conditions until you heat it up. And you have to heat the materials that I was working on to about 150 degrees.
Okay, so that's
before they start giving off their hydrogen.
But that sort of engine temperatures, that's not unheard of in engines in cars and so on.
No, not at all. And what we were doing was creating little pellets of these hydrogen storage materials and then very locally heating them using a kind of a control panel so that it was a really controlled release. So you're actually not even generating that much hydrogen gas
at
any one time. So there's not very much gas to actually ignite if, in a very rare event it did.
Yeah. And is the thinking that so hydrogen like has fuel cells is like one technology, and then combustion is obviously another way. Which way of those do you think it will, if it does go anywhere outside of buses, which are fuel cells currently, which way do you sort of see it going and why?
I mean, I think fuel cell technology is pretty good. The efficiencies on that is fine. With the combustion route, that's quite interesting because you can retrofit hydrogen into a normal like gasoline car to improve its efficiency and to reduce its emissions. So that's one interesting route of hydrogen, is just feeding hydrogen gas into an existing engine in order to improve its like environmental sort of qualities. So there's all sorts of different routes. And this is, I think, one possible handicap of hydrogen is that there's so many different ways that you can use it. And so, you don't get the economies of scale like you do with like lithium-ion batteries, which are like fairly widespread and can be in a car or a phone or a laptop. Standardized, exactly.
Yeah. No, the economies of scale in batteries are ridiculous. It's crazy when you look at the scale and the size. It's crazy. But I think, with any, if you look in like the 90s, people were talking as if hydrogen was definitely going to be the next big thing, right? So it's always difficult to see where things are going to go in a decade or two.
Yeah, that's true. And I think, with the environmental disaster that we have at the moment, like we shouldn't necessarily be putting all our eggs in one basket anyway. No. In reality, it's going to take wind power and tidal power and hydrogen and lithium-ion batteries and solar power and all the rest of it.
And nuclear.
To try and nuclear, exactly, to try and claw back. Yeah.
If you're talking about bad public perception, there's one for you.